In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the remote procedure call. It's a protocol that's often called RPC, and there are many implementations of RPC or RPC-like protocols. So RPC is actually a case where you've got two systems, maybe you've got a client and a server, for example, where you've got two programs that need to communicate with one another. And maybe one program is running on a completely different system or a different architecture. This is one way of getting processes or programs to communicate in ways that they may not otherwise be able to. So you could have one program actually making calls to another program to get functionality that the calling program doesn't actually have. There's actually a lot of functionality that you use on a pretty regular basis probably that uses RPC. So RPC has actually been around for a long time, and we'll just take a quick look at the sequence of events during a remote procedure call. So first of all, the client program actually calls a little stub function local to the calling program. All of the parameters and data that the function needs to have in order to operate gets called with that local function or local procedure. That stub then puts all of those parameters into a message and then makes the call to send the message out onto the wire to the remote system. That's where we get into the networking aspect. It gets sent over the wire to the remote system. The remote system receives it, pulls the message apart, gets the parameters that it needs, calls the procedure that is living on the server with those parameters, gets the reply, and then sends the reply back. That's how that actually works. And just walking through the quick sequence of events here during an RPC, it's reasonably straightforward. Rather than making a local function call and just having that function operate on your system, what you are doing is really making a function call over the network or over the wire. As usual, I've got a Wireshark capture here. What we've got here is actually a DCE RPC function, and there's some server message block stuff in here as well. And the reason for that is because there is a lot of RPC built into the way Windows does networking, whether it's communicating with the server for login and getting information about users and printers and file shares, or whether it's doing file transfers. There's a lot of remote procedure call built into that. We've got here a few packets that are actually RPC packets. And just want to show a couple here. This is where we're actually doing an RPC call. We're doing a TCP message. Here's the NetBIOS session service, and NetBIOS is another session layer protocol. NetBIOS has also been around for a long time. We've also got some application layer protocols like server message block. Right here is where we have the remote procedure call, which is actually the session aspect of it. The reason that it's a session aspect is because we establish this connection with the other system in order to transfer messages back and forth in order to achieve a particular goal or outcome. And so there's this session that gets negotiated, and we do a number of things to set up this session and establish the communication. So for example, you can see here in the RPC message, we're using version 5, and we can see that the packet type is a request. Here you can see the packet flags, and we've got object and did not execute, so we've got the ability to pass errors. We've got multiplex and cancel pending, and then first fragment and last fragment set. So there's only one message. You can see it indicates a data representation, so that way both endpoints know what the data is going to look like. So for example, we are using ASCII characters, and we're also using a little endian byte order. What that means is the least significant byte is going to be transmitted first. In big endian, the most significant byte gets transmitted first. In this case, we've got the least significant byte gets transmitted before the most significant byte. That's actually a bit backwards from how you would read. When we write a number, typically the most significant digits are going to be on the left-hand side. In this case, maybe that's not quite so backwards, because we're transmitting the smallest bytes first. So if you were to think about it, maybe that would be the rightmost bits, and then follow that up with the most significant bits, which would be towards the left. So some of it kind of depends on how you think about representation, but think about little endian versus big endian is which bytes get transmitted first. And little endian is the least significant bits. Those get sent out on the wire first. So what we're doing here is we're negotiating the communication that we're going to have. So that's all part of the session establishment. Right down here is the operation that gets called. And then we get the response in this message. And we still do the setup and negotiation of how all of this is going to work and how it's going to look. And you can see the call ID here. Again, we've got some information. This is actually the response to the message that was sent. This is really the return from the function call. This is all of the data that got returned from the function call that was made in this DS role get primary domain information. This is the primary domain information that we are getting back. And you can see here, it's a standalone workstation, and that's the response to the particular message that was sent previously. So this is the remote procedure call protocol. And as I said earlier, there are actually a number of implementations of this. The RPC that we just saw is part of the server message block, which is the foundation of Windows networking and communication between domain controllers and clients and Active Directory servers and doing file sharing and print sharing. RPC is really a primary foundation for doing those types of functions and getting all of the benefit from doing Windows networking. RPC really sits very deeply underneath all of that. If you're using Java, you'll use remote method invocation, which is RMI, and it's very similar to RPC. SOAP is actually similar to RPC. It's kind of based on an RPC-like functionality. CORBA is something that's similar to RPC. It's kind of an old protocol, not one that you'll see an awful lot these days. XML-RPC is kind of a Web 2.0 thing that you'll see an awful lot with things like WordPress, the blogging software, for example, or content management software. If you use image galleries in websites, those sometimes use an XML-RPC. What that does is a remote procedure call, but it marshals all of the data up into XML and passes the XML object over as a parameter to the procedure call. That's something that you'll see on a pretty regular basis. Whether you recognize that you're seeing it or not is, of course, a different story. But RPC is really a foundational protocol that you'll see on a pretty regular basis, no matter whether you're doing web communication or whether you're doing just standard Windows desktoping. You'll see RPC get used on a pretty regular basis. So if you were to just pop up Wireshark on your Windows system and do a packet capture and just take a look at what's going on, you should see a fair amount of RPC traffic as you do the capture and take a look at what you're seeing on a normal day-to-day basis. So that's the remote procedure call, and again, that's another session layer protocol.